Mr. Chair, I rise to take a call, my first call for the evening, on part one of the New Zealand International Convention Centre bill. I'm going to concentrate this part of my speech really around the economic benefits, and I take note of the previous speaker and her discourse around how this deal started out and the lack of transparency around it. At the time when the discussions were first occurring with the government about the need for a convention centre, I was an Auckland City Councillor, and it was definitely on the table that we should be negotiating between council, between the private sector and also with government to look at the benefits, the economic benefits of a convention centre. Now, if there is a good economic argument for a convention centre, then we'd certainly support that. But what we are seeing with this bill is an economic argument that hasn't taken the costs into account. Now, I'm not an economist, I don't dabble in that dark art. However, any normal person would at first do a cost-benefit analysis before you agreed upon a certain course of action that will cost New Zealanders, because the costs of this deal are externalised, and it's the New Zealand taxpayers who will be bearing that cost, while the provider of the convention centre, who keeps the convention centre, who keeps the profits of the convention centre, also profits from harm that is caused to ordinary New Zealand citizens. Now, the purpose and outline of this bill, as it says in Part 1, Clause 3, is that the overarching purpose is to provide economic benefits for New Zealanders. Do those economic benefits include the 5,000 convictions last year that were made from people who had gambling problems, and that was gambling problem-related crime? Because the cost of that is not only to the people who were the victims of that crime, which was committed to fuel gambling problems, but it's also us, the taxpayers. For every criminal who is convicted and spends a year in jail, it costs $91,000. And we can assume that with an extra 230 pokie machines, with an extra 12 automated gambling tables, which each have 20 seats, so are in effect another 20 pokie machines per automated table, and as well as 60 more tables, 40 more tables, I stand corrected, that there will be more problem gamblers as a result, because it's not going to be solely the convention centre attendees who will be gambling there. We know from all the reports that the Health Sponsorship Council have done, from experts both in New Zealand and internationally, that 40% of the profits that Sky City will get from those extra gambling concessions will come from people who have no control over their gambling behaviour. And for our government to say that that is what we will pay, that is how we will pay for this convention centre, is morally bankrupt. It is morally bankrupt. Mr. Chair, the bill doesn't take into account the economic costs that we will all bear from the suicide, from family violence, domestic violence, from child neglect. It doesn't take those costs into account, and these are the things that we need to be looking at if we are going to pass legislation that endangers, and it will endanger, New Zealand citizens. This is bad lawmaking. If we're looking at job creation, we've already heard that the reports that the officials themselves provided have said that the benefits for the country as a whole amounts to only 18 jobs. And I guess if you want to be cynical, you could look at the other jobs that haven't been taken into account, and they include the jobs across the road from the Sky City Casino at the Chow Brothers brothel. They include the increase in jobs for the budgeting service, who will be dealing with the families of the problem gamblers. They include the jobs that will be needed to be providing counselling for those who are suffering from problem gambling. They include the jobs in the correction service. They include the jobs, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, thank you. They include the jobs. They include the jobs that are mopping up after the problem gambling, sir. If those were the jobs that the government was counting, then at least we would have an honest assessment, an honest cost-benefit analysis of this deal in its total, because what we're seeing is not economic benefits to New Zealanders. Mr. Chair, I think there has been some comment about the negotiation and how poorly it was done. And I think that needs to be taken into account when we are considering the economic benefits. What we have here is a deal that extends the casino licence for it has a 35-year casino licence and extends it by 27 years. Now, each year of an extension of a licence is worth millions. And we know from Australia that is something that the government should have been negotiating. The cost of the convention centre is around about just over $400 million. Sky City is estimated to recoup the cost within 4 years based on their 25% increase in gambling opportunities that these concessions are delivering to them. We have sold ourselves cheaply. Not only have we sold ourselves down the tubes and our citizens down the tubes because we're carrying the cost of the deal, but we have also been incredibly cheap in the licence that we've given them. I guess we should also take into consideration the fact that this government has not considered the longer-term costs that we'll all bear. So over these 35 years, we're stuck with it. The Greens have said that we will be looking for ways to minimise harm, and we will come to that in the second part of this reading today. And my colleague Materia Ture, our co-leader, and myself both have SOPs that we hope will get support across the House, because if we are to rely on problem gambling as the way for Sky City to be paying for this deal, and we're not actually attempting to reduce it, then as lawmakers we are being remiss in our duties. One of the things that does concern me, I think, is the fact that the economic benefits have been so highly racked up, they've been inflated beyond what is actually accurate, that we tend to lose sight of what is happening in gambling as a whole. And we're tending to put forward legislation that will undermine our Gambling Act to some extent. And that is really worrying, because the Gambling Act there is solely to reduce harm from gambling. And yet we're seeing an attempt with this legislation to give concessions to Sky City which undermine our position on that. And that's one of the reasons why one of our SOPs talk about that as well. Several speakers on that side of the House have talked about the flow-on economic benefits. And in the second reading yesterday, we had people from other centres saying that the convention centre will result in additional tourism opportunities in their small towns. Now, we haven't seen the proof of that. We know that there are other convention centres across the country who will be competing for convention centre attendees. And unlike Auckland, people who go to a convention in Queenstown won't be going to a centre that was paid for through the suffering of children. If the member finds that too emotive, I suggest they look at the facts as they were presented by the officials. 6,500 children are estimated to be put at risk as a result of this deal, Minister. And I suggest you take that on board when you cast your vote, because it is a conscience vote, sir. And we will be wanting you to think with your conscience and exercise it.
We already have. I hope so.
Mr. Chair, it's not just children who suffer. International...
Chris Ockenbold.
I move that the question be now put.
I'm going to Chris Farfoy is on the committee. We're going to hear Chris Farfoy.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Chair, for the